Welcome back to part 2. I'm Denis Sullivan, a local historian. We're talking today about industrial Oxford in the 19th century. The 1880s was a time of labor organization, some of it quite violent here in the United States. People, as might be expected here in Oxford, that the plants also got caught up in this, and there's evidence of at least one organizing attempt that happened here. Let me tell you a bit about what conditions were like for working people at that time. Here in Oxford, the company store controlled the local economy. And this was a way in which they could exercise economic control over their workers and keep them in line. One of the artifacts that we have upstairs here at Shippen Manor is one of the actual books from the company store, one of the ledgers. The Reverend Yount in the bulletins of the Presbyterian Church has an item by Mr. Humphrey, who back in the 1930s was talking about 50 years earlier when he worked here at the plant, so in the 1880s, and describes how his first job was keeping one of those ledgers. And he says, I'm reading from his account, I would quote, "A ledger account was kept for every employee who was credited with his earnings monthly, and against the credit were charged all of his expenses." Now, you didn't just go down to the corner grocery to buy your groceries. You got them at the company store, or what the company store charged. You didn't pay rent to some landlord who owned your house. It was the company that owned your house, and so they deducted your rent from it. And so this went right down to the fees that people had to pay for their pews in church. It goes on. From this was deducted if you were a married man, the store account, rent, and so on. If you were single, the board as well, which you were receiving. And this was only the beginning. The office being the clearinghouse for all sorts of transactions. Church pew rents for all the churches in the village would charge the subscribers' accounts and credited to the church. And in turn, the minister traded out his salary and all the church supplies purchased at the company store. The result was that nearly everybody was in debt to the company. And the few who were thrifty enough to save, have a little credit balance at the end of the month, because all of this was deducted from their monthly earnings at payday, were lucky to have a couple of dollars to go home with. Many of them actually ended up with negative balances and were in debt to the company. So workers eventually began to rebel against these kinds of practices, unsafe working conditions, among other things, long hours, low pay, and they had a work stoppage. And the response of the company to this was not to negotiate with them, but in the dead of the coldest winter in a century, to lock them out of the plant. So there was no work to be had, no food to be gotten. In fact, railroad police were patrolling the tracks to prevent people from picking up the stray coal that fell off coal cars, so that they could keep their houses with them. Conditions were so bad that the Hackettstown Gazette even picked it up, and they mentioned that an editorial called "The Gaunt Wolf at Oxford," and said, "We doubt whether there is another town in the United States where there is as much misery and suffering in proportion to size and population that now exists in Oxford." The families have appealed to town authorities for aid, and many more have gone over the hill to the poorhouse. It goes on and tells that the managers of the works say the mill will not start up again until the employees will accept a reduction of 45% in their wages. That means you would go home with 55 cents a day for your 12-hour day. There is a record, in fact, that there was at least one effort to organize here by the Knights of Labor, which was an early union. It failed, but there was also enough misery here that attracted the attention of then Governor Abbott of New Jersey, who had an inquiry held about the conditions, and eventually the result of it was not the conditions improved that much, but that the company withdrew the manager of the works, Mr. Edmund Lukens, from his position as a kind of token gesture because they hired him back the next day at their office in New York. And so you have an idea here of exactly how things were being run. If you dare even talk about unionization, there were spies who were paid to report you. Some of them were Pinkerton agents, detective agencies. Some of them were employees who were paid a little bit extra to snitch. Employers required the employees to sign contracts that they would not organize as a condition of being employed, so that if they were caught trying, they could be fired. Worse than that, they were not only fired, they were blacklisted. The names were passed around to other companies in the area so that it was impossible for them to get any work at all. When I mentioned that people were lucky to go home with a few dollars at the end of the month's pay, because pay was once a month, we should mention that the lucky ones were able to walk home because so many of them left work at the end of the day either on a litter or limping. Conditions were, as far as safety was concerned, were so abysmal that the newspapers are filled with accounts of people being caught up in machinery, crushed, burned, smashed, etc. It was certainly not a decent place to work by a long shot. The end result of all of this was that the company began losing money. And people tended to say, well, the unions are what did it, or the driving up of the price of labor is what did it. But actually, it turned out to be another one of management's flops. The technology of making cut iron nails had pretty much passed into oblivion in favor of nails being made out of endless rolls of wire, the kind that you have today, round ones. And so the company actually failed around the turn of the century, went totally bankrupt. It defaulted on its bond payments to its bondholders, and it went up for sale, and it was actually idle for 2 years almost, until another company, Empire Iron and Steel, took it over around 1901, 02, thereabouts. Empire immediately dismantled some of the equipment around here, such as the nail mill, and shipped it back to Pennsylvania, along with some of the other equipment. And as a result, the industry continued on a much smaller scale than it had previously. It went on through the time of the Depression, and again idle, until afterwards the Allen Wood Steel Company purchased it, and Allen Wood gradually reduced all of these activities to just the mines. And the last mine in Oxford was closed and capped in 1964. There were still some businesses in Oxford, small businesses, and some of them have persisted. Of course, there are some new ones too, since the time of the company store having gone out of existence. In fact, the company store was even there, the wreck of it, the ruin of it, I should say, on an old triangle opposite Shippen Manor, except that fire devastated it and some of the adjoining business. Oh gosh, must be about 10 years ago, probably. And all of that was obliterated, that record, including the remains of the company store, and made into a nice little park. It's great improvement, actually. As we sit here looking out the window that you can't see because it's behind the camera, I can tell you this: if you drove up Route 31 with the traffic signal in Wall Street here in Oxford, you would be literally in the center of industrial Oxford. Off to your 2 o'clock, apparently, I'll use those expressions. Your 2 o'clock you see is a baseball diamond in an open field. That was the site of several plants. Among them was the rolling mill, a nail factory, a cooperage, a place that made barrels, and a stove factory, and a machine shop. To your left, you will see Shippen Manor up here on the hill. And if you made a left turn to the end of Wall Street, you would see Mine Hill Road. Down Mine Hill Road about, probably 100 yards or two, you would see the entrance to the Mosquito Control Commission. That was the location of the big smelter, number 2, the one that was built by the Oxford Iron and Nail Company that replaced the original Oxford furnace. You would also see the remains of the railroad rights-of-way that went all over town, which are just looking like little pathways through the grass, but straight lines. And if you went even further up Mine Hill Road, on your right, you would see a large indentation in the ground with a guardrail, in fact, protecting you. That was the site of the McKinley Mine, which was the major source of iron ore from the area. That mine, when it was closed down, of course, was no longer maintained, and so water undermined it, and it collapsed entirely. If you were to look over that barricade on to your right, it would look as if someone took about a 500-foot wide bowling ball and dropped it from about a mile up and made this huge indentation in the ground. Further on up are still houses that were company houses. You'll see them also on Mechanic Street, which is a little bit before you get to the light on your left. And the company houses were about 18 by 24 on a 30-foot wide lot. They were 4-room, built around a central chimney. 2 rooms downstairs and 2 rooms up. When you came in off the street, you were right in the middle of their living room kitchen. 1 bedroom downstairs. The stairway through that bedroom upstairs to the 2 bedrooms. However, it only went up to the first bedroom. The second bedroom you got to by going to a door. So the 2 bedrooms were adjacent. Everything was built around the fireplace for economy's sake. And these houses often had enough people living in them because of the company store business. In order to supplement income, people would sublet to tenants and also provide them with board. So you could have as many as 6, 8, even 10 people living in one of these houses. Often, or in some cases, in many cases, sharing bedrooms according to the shifts they were working on over at the plant. These houses were given away practically by Allen Wood Company when they left the area, sold to the highest bidder for a couple of $100 a piece, and people actually upgraded them, insulated them, and put central heating into them, so on. They're cute little places, but when you think about their origins, it does give you pause about how working conditions were back at the time that they were built. We have, actually, to wind up at this point, Oxford has a rich and varied history. It's no longer an industrial mecca as it was back in the 19th century, but it's still a very interesting town. So much of the artifacts of the 19th century are visible if you know how to look for them and where to find them. I recommend certainly that you visit the website of the Warren County Cultural Heritage Group, which has huge amounts of information about Oxford, the furnace, and the surrounding area, and that you actually take a walk. It's not a very big place. Start off in the middle of town and take a walk around and take a look at the buildings, because most of them were here when the heyday of the Oxford industry occurred. With that, thank you very much and have a pleasant day.